And it is 3:01. We will wait another minute or two before we get started, but let me welcome everyone to the VFI webinar, the Defending Democracy program. We're going to have a great chat today with two of my respected Microsoft colleagues, Jenny and Dave, and we'll get into intros in just a moment. We're going to let folks join and settle in. As always, I want to lay out and establish the ground rules of these webinars. We're going to ask everyone to stay on mute today. I would like to moderate the chat in the Q&A. We'll have the presentation first, and then we'll do some Q&A. But if you would, let me ask the questions. The timing for Jenny and Dave, they've got a lot going on, so I want to be sure we stay within our 1 hour time frame. And I do want to let everyone know this is being recorded, so we will make this available to the community once this is over. But I see a lot of good friends and folks joining. Frank Valdivicio, how are you doing? We have a very elite group called the Advisory Task Force. They're our most engaged VFI members. A lot of those folks have already joined and are on the call. Marion Breeze. And for those who are just joining VFI for the first time, if this is your first VFI webinar, VFI offers technology advocates to get engaged. That's really what we do. And we encourage action and engagement across the technology ecosystem, primarily related to tech policy. That could be privacy or cybersecurity, or today's program is election security. But we're always asking our folks to engage. So thank you for joining. It is 3:04. I'm going to turn it over to Jenny and Dave, and we're going to talk about election security and, most importantly, how you can get engaged in the 2020 elections. And I want to remind everyone, this is nonpartisan. This is not to promote Democrats, Republicans, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden. This is about engaging in the process. So let me turn it over to Jenny and Dave.
Awesome, thanks. Dave, why don't you start with introductions and then I'll take it from there.
Sure. My name is, I'm a security strategist. I help run strategic projects here on our Defending Democracy program. Sit in the same office with Dave on days when we sit in offices. And my background is entirely in politics and tech and the intersection of the two. And Jenny, you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining this afternoon. I assume at this point it's afternoon for everyone. We don't have any mornings left, but thank you so much for joining. As mentioned, my name is Jenny Bedanes. I am also on the Defending Democracy program with Dave, working on a team called Strategic Projects. And we'll get into a little bit of what that means, but we wanted to start by giving you a sense about why Microsoft cares about the issue and how we define it, because taking on defending democracy sounds quite broad. There have been many jokes about when we get our capes, but the reality is that Microsoft does have a role to play in it, and we've identified three main pillars that we attempt to do so with. The first is election integrity, and then there's campaign security, and then disinformation defense. So there's also kind of the question of why, which we get a lot. Why is Microsoft engaged on those issues? Why does it matter? These are some headlines from the last, 6 months or so. The one in the top right-hand corner, though, is from a week and a half ago. And it gives you a sense about the kind of activity that is happening out there and the way that it has increased over the last several years globally. So it's worth noting that our team does not just work in the US, we work globally, though today we are going to be focusing more on the election and the kind of work that we've been doing in that space. But I want to start by unpacking this headline in the top right-hand corner, where it says Russia, China, and Iran trying to hack presidential race. This is based on a blog that our boss authored a couple weeks ago. We're working with our threat intelligence team at Microsoft, who we refer to as Mystic. We were able to identify some activity that really showed an increase in interest by some nation states in interfering with our electoral process. And while I don't have a slide breaking this all down, I thought I'd take a minute here to actually tell you what was in that blog, what that meant. And then when we get to the end, please feel free to ask me questions. Dave and I are happy to speak about it. But here's in essence what we had in that report. First is that there's more than one actor involved. In fact, we were tracking 3 different actor groups in this particular case. The first one we refer to as Strontium. Interesting to note that Microsoft, specifically our threat intelligence team, when we refer to these advanced persistent threats, these nation state related organizations, we use Element. And so Strontium is a name that we use, but they're also known in other circles as Fancy Bear. And they gained a lot of attention in the 2016 US election because this is the same actor group who was involved in the hack and leak operations around John Podesta and the Democratic campaign committees, party committees. And so what we noticed from this particular actor from Strontium was first volume. They really increased the volume of attack they were doing against customers generally. I think in the blog, we note that there were over 200 organizations that we were able to identify in this particular campaign of theirs that they were targeting. Now, not all of them are involved in the political process. Not all of them are in the US. In fact, there were some in Europe and elsewhere. But there was a rise in number of organizations that we consider to be part of a political ecosystem, in particular consultants to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle were being targeted in this attempt, as well as some campaigns, people associated with campaigns, and a lot of individuals and organizations within the policy think tank type world were targets. The other thing that was interesting about the Strontium attacks in particular was their tactic. So they were using a really sophisticated password spray tactic. I would assume with this audience, password spray is maybe a term that you're familiar with, but in case you're not, it's essentially a way of taking passwords that are commonly used and just trying them one after another against an organization's domain to see if they get any takers, to see if they find someone who has a weak password that's part of this dictionary that they might be using. Now that in and of itself is not that innovative. Password sprays have been done for quite a while. It was the way in which they were delivering them, where they were going basically unseen. They were switching around IP addresses. They were doing a lot of activity to make it so it wouldn't trip any of the initial alarms that people might be looking for to identify this kind of activity. It was so interesting and unique that we actually published a separate blog. So if you were aware of this information that we released a couple weeks ago, but you haven't heard about the technical blog and you're interested, we'll be sure to drop a link into the chat here so that you can find that one as well. And in that blog, our team actually went into quite a lot of detail about exactly what they were doing, how they were doing it, how our team was able to identify it, and how others could check their own logs to see if they see any similar activity. So that's the Strontium actor. The next actor that we saw behavior from that was a little bit surprising, or at least drew our attention, was a group that we refer to as Zirconium. They're a very small APT group. They operate out of China, and their volume was quite low, but their targets were very interesting. They were targeting individuals associated with the Biden campaign in particular. Now, they weren't necessarily going after the Biden campaign's infrastructure, at least that's not what we saw. What we saw was that they were targeting very specific people on either personal accounts or old accounts that they had that were affiliated in some way with an organization that they had once belonged to. Because as you know, people who work on campaigns don't have that as their permanent job for 20 years, right? They move around, and so they have accounts in other places as well. And so we wanted to make sure the public was aware of that activity and what we were seeing there. The mechanism they used was slightly less innovative. They were using web beacons or web bugs. And what they were essentially trying to do, as far as we could tell, was more traditionally along the reconnaissance and research side of things. Though, of course, we certainly can't tell exactly what their motives or incentives were. And then the third actor is a group we refer to as Phosphorus. They're also known as Charming Kitten, and they operate out of Iran. And what we saw them doing was also highly targeted for specific individuals, primarily associated with the current administration, as well as the Donald Trump campaign itself, individuals associated with the Donald Trump campaign. And they were using very targeted attacks to try and steal credentials, get into accounts. using slightly more traditional phishing and brute force attack methods that you might expect. So that's what that post was about. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but wanted to give you just an early sense of the kind of work that we've been seeing in it. And I really think that it bolsters the why for our program. It shows that Microsoft has a vested interest in defending democratic institutions generally. We are involved in this, whether we would want to be or not, because of the activity happening on our platforms. And we think that we have a responsibility to our customers in this particular space to help protect them and look out for these sorts of attacks, especially when they're coming from nation state actors. So a few things about the way we approach this. We recognize we've got a lot to bring to the table. We've got technology, we have people, we have a role of leadership in the industry. We know that there are groups in there are civic society organizations, there are other companies, there's government organizations. Creating partnerships between them is something that we do well as a company and something that we think is extremely important to solving these sort of bigger issues. And similar to what was said at the beginning of this, we're nonpartisan. This is not in any way about advancing an agenda or a particular candidate. We want to protect everybody who is entering into this arena. And then again, it's a global initiative, even though, again, we'll be focusing mostly on US-based systems. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk to you a little bit about some of the actual services programs that we've been rolling out to give you a sense of how Microsoft thinks it fits into this space. And after we go through those, I think Dave will give you some action items, things that you can do to get involved. And then, of course, we're happy to take questions. So Dave?
Thanks, Jenny. So I'm just going to quickly go over kind of what our main programs are that we operate in our election integrity space and our campaign security space. Hopefully a lot of you on this call have heard of Election Guard. It's kind of one of the biggest splash we've probably made as a group in the last 2 years. When we first as a team in 2018, we talked to a lot of folks in this election security space, and we said, what can we do that would be genuinely helpful to the security of elections that no one else is doing and that Microsoft is in a unique position to do? And we heard from a lot of folks that security R&D was very difficult for a lot of the voting machine manufacturers and that kind of thing. They're small, they don't have the ability to do a lot of extra R&D around their products. And specifically, we were pointed to our own shop. In Microsoft Research, we have a man named Josh Benelo. Dr. Benelo wrote a seminal paper back in 1987 called Secret Ballot Verifiability in Elections. And it's considered like one of the masterpieces of election security research. And it outlines what's called end-to-end verifiability in elections. So we worked with him, we worked with a bunch of the vendors, and we've tried to make his dream a reality. Software development kit. It's free. It's freely available on GitHub right now. And we've been working with a lot of the vendors and various stakeholders in the space to try and incorporate this into their own products. The idea is at a very high level, once you vote, you walk away with a tracker. It's a paper on it. And it's uniquely tied not to the information of your vote, but to the fact of your vote. So you can go back afterwards and check that your vote was counted as cast, which is the parlance of election security. So it gives you a reference and a peace of mind that your vote was actually included in the tally of an election, which is revolutionary. That has not happened to date. That is a thing that is currently seriously lacking in our elections, is the ability for citizens to verify the results of the election. So this is our big project. I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in contributing as a developer or getting involved in that project in any other way. Let us know. We're always happy to talk about it. I'll say, I don't think it's on the slides, but you can email us protect2020@microsoft.com, and that'll hit me and Jenny and some of our colleagues. We also have been, and I lead a lot of this for the company, we've been working specifically with elections directors and secretaries of state on how can we help them secure the conduct of the elections. So there's a couple of things that we've cooked up this year and that we're moving forward with. One, should change it to say election war room. If we say war room publicly, I think I'm supposed to owe our comms folks lunch for the rest of the year. This is our election resiliency efforts. So we're working with our secretaries of state to make sure that they have everything they need from us. 24/7 monitoring, extra attention, a phone number, an email that they can call, they can email and get immediate attention. So we're actually right now starting this week ramping up how we support the elections. And on election day, we'll have, a war room with everybody talking to each other all day, making sure that we can escalate incidents immediately when they occur. And part of that work has been just making sure that where we identify not just Azure workloads, but also, people using M365 for their email in the conduct of elections, that we're paying attention to those, that we're identifying them, that we're making sure we know everything we can about them, that we're fully ready to support them. And another way we're supporting those secretaries of state and elections directors is with proactive security assessments called election security advisors. So we can bring in our detect and respond team, which is the greatest team at Microsoft you never want to meet, because they're the ones who come in when you have to deal with the really bad guys. But we're able to leverage their unique abilities to do assessments of systems for elections administrators up front at basically free or at cost. And it's normally a very expensive service. So that's been a great way that we've been able to bring to bear the resources of all of Microsoft in service of admins. On the campaign security front, and I should say that all of these efforts are not just US specific. We actually do them internationally as well. So, we've worked with countries on their Azure workloads and lightweight war room activities. But I say that because for campaign security, we've done a lot of trainings. So we've done trainings in the US with political parties here, but we've done them in India, we've done them in Canada, we've worked with some partners to do them in Argentina, we've done them all over Europe, traveling roadshow throughout Europe. So we've worked with a lot of outside groups and a lot of political parties in a lot of different countries on campaign security trainings. Because honestly, a lot of the biggest focus on campaign security is on protecting the individual. Ginny mentioned these attacks from sophisticated nation state actors. They often will go after people's personal accounts. So making sure that the people who are involved in campaigns know how to protect themselves is key. We have tried to offer up some software assistance where we can as a team and as a company. The two big things that we offer there are Account Guard, which essentially provides a unified threat detection experience. So, if my organization, I'm on campaign A, and I use my personal Hotmail address in the conduct of that campaign, I can, campaign A is enrolled in Account Guard, I can enroll my own personal email address to be unified with the campaign, so that if they attack me at my personal email address, the campaign knows about it and has full visibility, which is critical these days, right? And we often refer folks to the John Podesta situation, which, the Strontium did not attack, well, as far as we know, did not successfully compromise the Clinton campaign. They did, however, attack John Podesta's personal Gmail, and we know that. That's all publicly available information. So protecting people's personal accounts is tantamount to protecting the campaign. And we offer another service called M365 for campaigns. I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in a campaign, but beyond less than a congressional campaign, it's often your uncle setting up the email for the campaign before the campaign ever gets started. We've tried to make that as an easy a process as humanly possible by providing M365 with security add-ons and security configurations pre-provided at the nonprofit price, so that it's easy and cheap for people to do. Because we've heard from all of our political stakeholders that that's the only way that people are going to be forthcoming in implementing our security recommendations, if we provide them an easy button to essentially hit and turn on all the security protections. So that's and I'll just mention key partnerships. Defending Digital Campaigns and Belfer Center at Harvard are two of our premier partners in this space. The Belfer Center produces a product called the Campaign Security Playbook, which is the gold standard in this space. And when we've done international trainings, we actually use internationalized versions of that same playbook. So yeah, that's
one thing to just add from a lot of this is about services we identify, technology, but there's also a regulatory aspect to what we do occasionally, and policy related as well. In particular, around Microsoft Account Guard, when we first wanted to offer that, we wanted to offer it to political campaigns who were already a customer of ours for free, right? We're not a sales team. We're certainly not looking to make any money. We wanted to give this away so that we could harden political campaigns, make them stronger from a security perspective. But the pushback we received when we first sort of floated this idea was, well, you can't do that because it would be a corporate in-kind contribution to the campaign, and they can't take that. And none of us wanted to go to jail, neither us on the offering end, nor of course the campaigns on the receiving end. So what we had to do was actually break into the regulatory environment and figure out where the problem was and what potential solutions there were. And so this is a case where we actually went to the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, and we made a case that our brand reputation was on the line, that if a big political campaign used our product and had a massive hack and leak operation, that would be bad for us. And this is our way of protecting ourselves by protecting them. And we got a unanimous verdict from the partisan FEC commission, which was really great to see. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because one of our partners that Dave was just pointing out, the Defending Digital Campaigns group, they are a nonprofit that essentially emerged from that advisory opinion that we got from the FEC. They built on ours, got their own advisory opinion from the FEC, and now they're allowed to be sort of a collector of cybersecurity software and services that they can give out to political campaigns for free. So it goes beyond just the argument we made, where it's in our best interest to do this, and it took it a step further and said political campaigns need this help. They need software. They need resources. This is something that they desperately need, and they're never going to pay for. They can't afford it. And the FEC agreed with that and gave them the permission to do that. So we partner with them to offer some of our software and services out to campaigns for free, which is a great way to be able to do that while still maintaining the rules and keeping us all out of jail. But moving on into our disinformation pillar. So disinformation is a challenging one for us as a company. When we look at our colleagues and friends at other companies in an industry, they all have big social media platforms where when you talk about disinformation and politics, it's sort of obvious that there's an issue, where they should be playing, what role they have. With Microsoft, we started out in a slightly different place. We of course have LinkedIn, which is a social media platform. We have Bing, we have Microsoft News. There are certainly a lot of places where this is an issue and something we care about, but it did put us in a little bit of a different position than our peers. I think was beneficial. It put us in a position where we could lead, and we could make points and not be back on our heels, but rather leaning forward on making changes and advocating for changes. So one of the things that we're really focused on is the media literacy side of that work. And on a technology standpoint, we recognize that we have resources within the company, particularly within our AI divisions, that could be really helpful in helping solve some of the trickier problems around disinformation. In particular, we just made an announcement, I think about 3 weeks ago now, about some work we're doing with others around deepfake technology. Deepfakes, also known as synthetic media.
And I'm Lizzie.
Oh, sorry. Deepfakes, also known as synthetic media, which that has received a lot of hype. So I'm assuming most of you have heard of it, but if not, it's the ability to use technology to make someone look like they're doing something they didn't do, saying something they didn't say, whether visual or auditory. There's also audio versions of deepfakes that's out there. And the real challenge with deepfakes is that the technology to create them has moved so quickly and has really been democratized in many ways. Any of us could really get some of the tools that are out there and create a somewhat compelling deep fake. So if you think about those who have resources and the interest to do so, they could really truly make some videos that are really hard for individuals or machines to detect. And of course, synthetic media is not always a bad thing. There are really great uses of it. I like movies. I'm pretty sure that a lot of that I like in movies didn't actually do the things it looks like they did when they're doing a stunt. So we recognize that there's a positive use for this technology, but we also recognize that there are some negative sides to it, and we're working to combat that. So we have some partnerships around detection technologies. We'll also drop the blog post from that announcement into the chat so that you all can read a little bit about what we're doing around deep fakes. But we also had a quiz that we put out in partnership with UW, trying to make people more aware of this issue. Those of us who live and breathe this stuff are very familiar with the challenges around deep fakes, but if individual consumers of news and information aren't also aware of it or thinking critically when they watch a video, then no matter of how much detection technology you put out there, you're never going to win. And so you really also have to address the human element of it and how people interact with that. We're also in the process of putting together a similar quiz around disinformation. So stay tuned for that one, where you as an individual can kind of walk through a process of, am I able to spot what was real, what was fake, how it was manipulated? And we're working with a partner called NewsGuard on that. NewsGuard is it sounds a lot like some of our products, Account Guard, Election Guard. That's just a coincidence. They're their own company, but they have a really interesting approach to disinformation. They essentially look at the publisher level and do research using journalistic integrity principles to determine the trustworthiness of that source. And so they do things like, does this site post corrections? Do they reveal the source of their funding? Do they have bylines on all of their articles? And they use all of those criteria to essentially create a score. And then you can see that score site if you have a browser plugin or if you're using another feature that's using NewsGuard. So for example, if you're interested in it, you can go to Edge and look up NewsGuard plugin, and it's a browser extension that's free with Edge. If you want to take a closer look at how it can exist in your social media ecosystem, and you might be surprised at some of the sites that have red ratings. You might be surprised at some of the sites that have green ratings, frankly. It's not a partisan effort. They're very nonpartisan about it. It's just about the trustworthiness of the source of the information. So we have a lot of other partnerships, as you can see, lots of academic work in this area. We have more to be talking about this coming soon, but that is sort of, in a nutshell, the work that we've been doing around disinformation at this point. And it's just some additional partnership information. Oh, from there, I think, are open to questions.
Jenny, Dave, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so just real quick before we open up questions, I know that you had asked us to say a little bit about
right.
how people could get involved.
Yes.
I'll make a quick plug and just say, like, look, we don't have a slide on it, but half of all poll workers in this country are over 60. Half, traditionally in a presidential year. They are also, that group of people is also the most susceptible to COVID-19. And, you know, the thing that elections officials need the most right now across this entire country is volunteers to work the polls on election day who feel that they are healthy and comfortable doing so. Most, as far as we understand, everybody has the PPE they need. Everybody's got extra money to conduct elections. What they need is volunteer. And actually, it's not even technically a volunteer job. It's paid in most states. So I will say Washington State does not need any more people. We've heard this from the Secretary of State there. They do mostly mail-in elections, and you know, they do need several thousand volunteers, but they've got them all. And we were able to do a recruitment drive a few weeks ago internally at Microsoft that netted a few hundred Microsoft employees to volunteer. But if everyone on this call feels they would like, I just saw the question, what's the process? If you will go to powerthepolls.org, and I'll put that link in the chat, there's a form you can fill out for and the information will either get passed on to the state or it will take you on to the state, depending on which state you're in. But that's honestly, of all the things, like, I could talk to you about volunteer opportunities to get people out, and if anybody has any questions, you can follow up with me, but that's the thing that's most needed. So
poll workers are the most needed, Dave, is that correct?
Yeah.
And look, and let me clarify something. I don't think this was made clear, and this is not important, but I do want to make the distinction. Dave is, can I just call you the Democrat on the team here? And Jenny represents our Republican side of the aisle, and they work together. We have a bipartisan relationship here. They work fantastic. These are great folks. But we wanted both of them to be able to tell the listeners today how you can get engaged, and we know poll workers are in great need. Jenny, I want to go back real quick. At the very top, you mentioned Mystic, and that's our operations center in Redmond. Some of the partners may have visited that operations center. Can you tell us just real quickly a little bit more how that process works? You don't have to reveal anything business confidential, but I think it's super interesting on how we monitor this and the type of tools we use, and then how we work with the authorities to try to shut it down.
Sure. So the Mystic team is, there are certainly a lot of them based in Redmond. I think a lot of them work out of the CDOC, which is the likely the place that people have been on a tour. But a lot of them are in the DC area, and they're spread out all over. These folks are not entirely, but a lot of them come from backgrounds in government. And it's important to recognize that across the company, within all the product teams, there are strong security teams where folks are working really hard to protect our customers, both by building security products, making sure they're deployed correctly, but then also watching for attacks and working closely with Mystic on what they're seeing come in. What Mystic does that's particularly interesting and different is they actually look outward versus looking inward. And what I mean by that is they are tasked with identifying the advanced persistent threat actors. And they have analysts who are assigned to very specific actors, and they live their life in a very different place than we do, hopefully, on the dark web and in other places where they're really tracking these actors and their actions and their behaviors, because at some point that will benefit Microsoft customers in protecting them. Occasionally it will protect people who aren't Microsoft customers as well, because they'll sometimes uncover things that aren't necessarily related to our platform or our customers, but they'll work with others, whether in government or at other companies, to share information as appropriate to make sure that they're protecting their own customers too. So they're part of this larger threat intelligence community that's working, again, across industry and across government to protect folks from particularly nation state actors, these bigger advanced threats who are coming after us. One thing that they do in partnership with our legal team that's quite interesting, I think, is they've identified a tactic to basically take down some operations. And I'll use, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll use sort of the layman's version as far as I understand it. But what my understanding is they essentially, once they have identified a site that maybe is pretending to be a Microsoft site, so it's trying to but to be a OneDrive site or SharePoint or something, what they're able to do is work with a special magistrate to subpoena the owner of that site and essentially say, come to court and argue that this is your site. Well, those actors are never going to show up in a United States court to defend the site. They just let it go. And so what happens in that process is that Microsoft is able to then get control of those sites, sinkhole them, do additional research on what they're able to find, and hopefully build out a stronger profile for that actor. And then by doing that, protect our customers even more. So it's scale-wise, you know, you're not going to get all of the impersonating sites out there by doing that, but you send a message and you're also making their return on investment just that much harder. You're making it even more challenging for these bad guys to do what they're trying to do by just getting in their way and creating roadblocks. And I just thought it was really interesting that one of the most successful tactics they've done is a legal maneuver versus some kind of, you know, dark behind the scenes hacking ninjutsu. They're actually using lawyers and having great effect. But that's the Mystic team, and that's primarily what their job is. And they typically don't talk to big external groups. Occasionally they will. But we work really closely with them, and they've been, you know, a really wonderful asset to our team to help identify how the actors they're watching are impacting customers in the democracy space globally.
Well, thank you, Jenny. I've been watching this team mature and grow for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. It's been an amazing
entity and a team to work with. Of course, I have a deep background in politics and campaigns, so I'm always interested in what this team is doing to protect and defend our system, if you will. Can one of you give an example or two? I know we can read this in the newspapers, but can you give us an example of what nation states actually do, some of the tactics that they try, and give the listeners some on what nation states are doing to kind of disrupt the process?
Jenny, all right if I? Yeah. So I mean, I'll just say this is all in the Mueller report. So you want a fun read? It's only 400 pages. And actually, the thing that Ginny just described, the process with going to the special master, getting website URLs subpoenaed, is all mentioned in there as well, around a specific, a very specific thing, actblues.com. If you're familiar with the Democratic fundraising site, actblue.com. Actblues.com was what the Russians tried to lure people with as a fake URL that we originally set up that process around. Also mentioned in the Mueller report. But in the Mueller report, they talk a lot about hack and leak. So the Russians' main motivation, or whatever you want to describe it, their MO, their modus operandi, is to get people's personal information and use it to further inform what we know they are already doing, which is a massive misinformation operation, right? You can ascribe political motivations. I think their political motivations are pretty obvious, how they feel right now, but or at least they were in 2016. But when they're attacking infrastructure, when they're attacking people's personal accounts, it's all in the quest of attaining information that will help further their misinformation campaign. That's been pretty well documented, and we're seeing it play out now too. As much as we, suspect or know that they had invaded particular infrastructure around the elections in 2016, they don't appear to have done anything. And from where we sit, that was probably all. It's the old military term psyops, right? Like, that's been their specialty for 100 years. 100 years of the Soviet Union, this is what they did, right? It was psyops. Like, this has always been the Russian specialty. They're messing with us. They mess with us so to get us to distrust our own democracy and distrust our own leaders. And we see places like the Ukraine. They eventually supplant that with not just don't distrust your own people, but trust us more. And that's always been their MO. And then, we see different motivations from different actors. The Chinese are intelligence gatherers and always have been. They go after people's accounts for, as far as we can tell, the purposes of just gathering information. Maybe they intend to utilize it, maybe they don't. Maybe they just want the information. But it's not. I mean, we don't try and ascribe motivation to them, but we track their activities and what they tend to do with those things.
I'll add to that it's not an actual anecdote of a real attempt or anything, but it is, I think, an interesting way of understanding the way that these actors behave when it comes to disinformation. And I can't take any credit because I'm actually just going to steal something that DHS has put together that's actually, I think, really helpful and compelling. And again, we'll put it in the chat. DHS was specifically CISA, which is the organization that's focused on critical infrastructure. They're the ones who are responsible for election security within the agency. They were struggling with, how do we explain to people the way that these actors work in developing a disinformation campaign? And so they decided to use an example. And the example they chose I find hilarious, which is, does pineapple belong on pizza? So that comment creates very strong opinions, I have found. People feel really strongly about whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza, but they managed to pick a topic that is also, so far at least, hasn't become partisan. You can't take it to that level. And so they use this graphic to help you understand. They start with an issue that already exists. We already have strong feelings about pineapple on pizza. And then they create a wedge and they start driving conversations. They build up Facebook groups, they build up Twitter profiles. They start feeding something that is already inherently there. We already have opinions about this. And then they start pitting you against each other. And then all of a sudden, you hate the people who think pineapple belongs on pizza because it doesn't, and that's gross. And then they start getting you angry, and then the other people get angry. So anyways, I'm not describing it as well as the graphic does, but it shows the different stages that they'll go through using this one divisive topic and how at the end it becomes a massive issue. Whereas before it was just kind of a small little anecdotal thing that you didn't like pineapple on pizza, and that's not a big deal. So I'll put that in the chat, but it's one way to think about the progression of these issues, and a reminder that when it comes to disinformation, they don't tend to come up with wholesale new topics. That's not helpful. That's really hard to do. What they do is they find things we already care about, that we're already divided about, and they just make it worse.
I'll say I just shared their the marketing slick on war on pineapple in the chat, but to Ginny's point, what we saw in and I will say pineapple has no place on pizza. Oh. End of story. Fight
I disagree.
Don't at me. That's what people say. They have content mills out of Eastern Europe, in Romania and places like that we've seen the Russian government fund, and they can do for a few $1,000,000, they can have 1,000 people sitting at computers in a warehouse in Eastern Europe, just churning out garbage. I mean, most of what they churn out is utter garbage that would make no sense if you saw it. We saw that especially in Ukraine around the 2015 election there. But they just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And what sticks, they find what sticks. It's like doing a giant scientific experiment on optimization. They just throw out 50 different variations on a graphic. People start sharing the one and they go, okay, well, that's the one we'll drive. And then they, before Facebook implemented a lot of their reforms 2 years ago, they would just, for pennies on the dollar, drive, paid advertising around some of these graphics. Now they do it around organic sharing, but it's still very effective, very effective. And I mean, it's some of the stuff you'd see, like the most shared graphic from 2015 during the Ukraine election had something to do with like, if you love Lenin and Jesus, support Mother Russia, or so. I mean, it like a statement that literally made no sense, but that was the most shared graphic of 2015 in Ukraine. Yeah.
So I did have one question in the chat. I think I know the answer to this, but are they foreign state players? This is going back to our nation state actors or those from foreign countries. Are they foreign state players or a group of individuals non-sponsored by the state?
Yeah, it's an incredibly tricky question because it really, I hate to do the it depends answer, but it depends. The actors that we're referring to in the announcement we made recently, we have high level of confidence that these are actors who are supported by the governments in which they reside. And that is making that kind of attribution is a really challenging thing to do. And we don't with the backing of the federal government. Essentially, what the federal government has made that comment, and we just say, as the government has said, is often referred to with the Russian government, right? We'll be careful not to be the ones to make that attribution, because honestly, that is not our role to necessarily to identify intent or who's paying them or where they're coming from. But what that question also gets at is, intentionally or not, is the question about what happens with citizens within our own country who are acting in similar ways. Now, potentially they can scale, potentially they can't in the way that these other actors can. But there is also the issue of if they're US citizens and they're engaging in a disinformation campaign, it's a little bit different from a freedom of speech standpoint than when you're dealing with a nation state that's looking to interfere. So that maybe gives you a hint as to how complicated this whole thing can get. But I hope that answers your question as far as what we release specifically, but then also more generally on that topic.
Well,
I will just put a very fine point on it. I mean, the CIA issued a statement on Monday saying that they believe that Putin is personally directing influence operations against the United States right now. So, I mean, our intelligence community fully supports this decision. And I actually flippantly said the Russians are paying the Internet Research Agency. And to Ginny's point, that's a conclusion that the intelligence community has drawn that I am parroting, but Microsoft is not involved in that attribution.
This is fascinating, and as all of the folks know that tune into these calls on a regular basis, there is always a call to action, and that's, you've already touched on it, Dave, and that's, we need poll workers. Remember, this is nonpartisan, so we encourage anyone listening, please get engaged. Go, Dave and Jenny and I spoke last week or so, and one of the other things we talked about was registering voters as well. I don't know if either one of you have links on that. And of course, there's always just getting directly involved in the campaigns. And Dave or Jenny, I welcome you to drop chats from your respective parties, hopefully both parties, into the chat if you would, if folks want to just dive in and go. Jenny, I know they're probably doing more door knocking on your side than Dave's side, as I understand it. But I would like to continue to explore those tactics and tools and any links that you guys have in the few minutes we have remaining.
Yeah, look, I mean, let me just say, Dave, we talked about this before, but like, I always say this when talking about civic engagement is like, we can do all of this work to defend democracy, but if you don't go vote, like, it literally doesn't matter, right? Voting is all that matters in the end, and conducting the election, an election can be as secure as you want, but if nobody shows up, then it doesn't matter. So voting is first and foremost the thing that you need to do. Registering people to vote is a great activity. It's a great nonpartisan activity, I will also say. There are several organizations that I'm happy to point people to that do volunteer nonpartisan voter registration. And you know, from the partisan side, I don't know, Jenny, I will say, if you'd like to get involved with the Democratic Party, please text Joe to 30.
Feel free, Jenny, hopefully drop in something similar if you have it, so we can be fair here.
My recommendation from a volunteering standpoint, well, first I'll just, foot stomp the registration piece. Yesterday, I doubt any of you could have missed it, was National Voter Registration Day. And it serves as a reminder, if you're not registered to vote and you're eligible, please do. And even if you are, go and check your registration, make sure it's active. Some people get surprised on election day. Don't let that be you. Make sure that everything is where you expect it to be and that there won't be any issues when you actually go to vote. It just takes a couple seconds and gives you that assurance. The other thing is make a plan to vote. Are you going to do it online? Are you going to do it or not online? Are you going to, don't do that. Are you going to do it by mail? Are you going to do it in person? Are you going to go early? Just come up with a plan, figure out what works for you, what makes you comfortable as far as how you're going to vote. Volunteering wise, if you're interested in volunteering on the GOP side, on the Republican side, my recommendation is actually go to your state party. So that's a little bit harder for me to plug into the chat. Because there's a different party for every state. There are great opportunities to volunteer with the national party as well as with the Trump campaign if that's interesting to you. But I think that you'll probably find more opportunities within your own community. And that also might open up your opportunities to volunteer for candidates other than just the top of the ticket. So if you have interest in getting more engaged in your community with people who are running for Congress or Senate or even at the down ballot level, if you go to your state party, you'll find lots of resources for what you can do to further your party from your own community. I think that that's a really important thing that gets missed a lot when people go straight to the national level. What impacts you more on a day-to-day basis? Well, I suppose this is a hard thing to say now, but what happens at the federal level or what happens at the local level? Typically, it's the local level. And so I would just encourage you to be more engaged with your local and state parties.
I want to answer two questions in the chat real quick about voluntary.
Yes.
Mark and Jason just asked if they have special skills to volunteer. It's a little late to talk about getting Microsoft tools involved in the election. I mean, we're 40 days out. Like, nobody's going to be implementing new tools for the most part, right? But these elections officials, there's 9,000 elections jurisdictions in the United States. Feature, you can call it a feature, you call it a bug, it is what it is. There's 9,000 elections officials. They all need help. They all need security help. And we've been working with University of Chicago to recruit volunteers for tech and cybersecurity specialties so that they can pair folks up with elections officials who need the help. I'll put the link in the chat, but if you go to aka.ms/cybersurge, that will take you to the page where they're recruiting.
And Dave, you posted this link last week, I believe, internally.
Yeah.
So that the tech savvy folks like our Microsoft partner community, they can, help on the back end of the technology side to make sure this goes a little more smoothly. That would be a great thing to drop in the chat if you can.
Yeah, I will. And Jason, that's specifically to elections officials. Oh, and there, Jenny just dropped in it. Great, thank you. Also, I just want to mention real quick, Ramki asked, what is the U.S. government doing to fight these guys? And I know you flippantly said release sleeping gas into the warehouses where they're working. Actually, in 2018, the U.S. government authorized the first proactive action against who we think is primarily responsible in Russia for taking these actions against U.S. elections. And they cut the power. They cut the power to their facilities the week before the election and made sure it stayed off for the week of the election. That was the U.S. Cyber Command. That was a big deal, and it was the first proactive action that the U.S. government had taken in this war, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so just to mention it, just to answer that question.
Well, listen, I know we're coming to the end. I want to say that at Microsoft anyway, I've noticed that I got a notice from our HR people saying that we can take the day off or give some time to vote. And I would encourage those to call who might be in the HR space or can influence those up the ladder, if you can be sure that your employees have the option to and the opportunity to take a few hours off of work so they can cast their vote, get engaged, maybe be a poll worker like Sally Ehrenfried, I noticed, has already volunteered to be a poll worker. She's one of our top advocates. But if those companies can engage from the top and let the folks, out of their, I know we're no longer sitting in cubicles, but if you will, I think that's a great idea. It's a great concept. I was proud to see Microsoft do that this time around. Dave, Jenny, any final comments or anything you want to add on how folks can engage?
Just say it again. Go.
Go vote. Register to vote.
Yeah,
Well,
and
listen,
if you have any questions
Concur.
for us,
Yeah.
protect2020@microsoft.com. We're happy to answer them.
you guys are fantastic. You're great colleagues. I enjoy working with both of you. You're solid professionals. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the VFI call and educating the community today. And having said that, I think I'm going to turn it off, and thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you all.
Janie.
Thank you all.
Bye.